Here
Cheers.
we go. Cheers.
Welcome to Founders Raw.
Thank you very much.
So Matt, I appreciate you sitting down. What I'd like to do is just really talk about, what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and maybe to start with, take me back to maybe your childhood. How'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up? And then how did you get into technology and founding your first company?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe it's funny you mentioned childhood. I wonder if that sort of led to me getting into kind of an entrepreneurial mindset. Not so much the lemonade stand on the corner thing, I actually never did that, but maybe I did, but it was an abject
How about
failure.
paper route?
And yeah, I was a substitute paper route kid
well, at least you're
for
there.
a while, but I mean that didn't really fire the imagination, It was just we just moved to Michigan, so this is where I guess I'll get to it. We just moved to Michigan, this town, Midland, Michigan, and some neighborhood kid that I had met, it was 2 doors down. It was his paper route, but he was gone for 2 weeks in the summer, so I took it over from him. I'd sort of learned my way around the neighborhood because I hadn't really toured on my bike way out and around the corner there, and it turned out he had a huge route, so I realized, location is everything, I guess. But that was, so again, I don't know that was necessarily an entrepreneurial foundation, but what I do think is that we moved a lot when I was a kid. I was born in Indianapolis. My dad worked for Dow Chemical, which is akin to working for the military, because you move a lot, at least he did in his career. And so born in Indianapolis, lived there for about 3 years, then we moved to Milano, Italy, and I spoke Italian about as fluently as then, age 4 or 5, whenever that was, as I spoke English, which was cool.
That's awesome.
And then we moved to Miami, Florida. After that, all the Italian goes just evaporates because there's no support for it. I moved, I went to a Montessori school, but that was the only Italian spoken was the name of the school, right? And so there was no reinforcement for it, so it disappeared. But all these different, and then 3 years after that, some time in Miami getting sunburned. You can see I'm probably the type, right? And then we moved to Dallas, Texas. That's a whole other set of experiences and people and things to do, and a very distinct culture. I mean, Miami was a bit of a melting pot and full of conflict, and an odd place in the late 70s. And it was before Don Johnson and company had come to town and brought the T-shirt and suit looks, and drove the Ferraris and Lamborghinis around. So perhaps it wasn't quite the Miami people have in mind. Moved to Dallas. That was during the Dallas era of TV, Who Shot JR and all that good stuff. Gen X references will be coming, I'm sorry. But then finally back to the Midwest in Midland, Michigan, this town where the company's headquartered. All that moving around, I guess, meant there's constant change in my life.
Right, yeah.
And I had to make new relationships and start over with friends. Finally, we moved to Michigan. I was there from 6th grade to high school, so there was some consistency to it. But figuring out okay, I'm in a new place. I've almost literally been airdropped in here. How can I make the best of a challenging situation?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a chameleon in a way. The ability to become comfortable in a unique or new environment really quickly.
Yep. And you hear a lot in entrepreneurial circles or small company circles about change is everything, and we're either the big disruptors or we ourselves are going to have to eat our own young or be ready for things to change on a dime for us, but we're supposedly faster on our feet than the big guys, the established companies, and usually a smaller company with fewer people. That better be true.
Right.
But I think that growing up experience kind of led me to feel like I should never get too comfortable or expect too much of a routine to develop, because that is bad or that is different than what I'm used to. So therefore, that's something I don't, I don't think I want to make a part of my drill. Yeah.
And so going forward, what was your first experience in hacking on something or starting a company or just a product of some sort?
My hacking experience, as far as computing was concerned, friends with Apple IIs, and then I had an Atari 800 of my own, and my first programming was in BASIC, so yay command line of the day and age. But so I got, much like a lot of folks in my generation, I think, who've ended up in technology, I got very interested in computers at 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old age. But I didn't really connect any of that to business or think a whole lot about career or that until a good deal later. I did write a review of a product, a graphics product for the Atari 800 that got published in some magazine. I think it was called Antic magazine. It was an Atari PC enthusiast magazine, and that kind of suggested to me, hey, there's a bigger world out there, and you can have a voice here. And it was, of course, printed, and this was 1983 or 84 or something. But it was cool. I was like, hey, I got published. So I can string a couple of sentences together, and it shows that I have this interest in the area. But I didn't do anything that was like startup-y, I guess, until I got to college. and kind of continuing with the writing and layout and like the interest in technology for communication thing that I had kind of keyed off of going way back. I created a resume publishing service. I had started to figure out desktop publishing. I was like one of the first, I don't know if I was one of the first people, but I was certainly one of a very small set of people like totally psyched about Quark Express and Aldous PageMaker.
Well, how did you?
You know, and I was just like, hey, this is neat. I'm gonna like figure out how to do this in ways that are better than what people are doing in their WordPresses or Word, and you know, help them sell themselves.
So how did you discover that problem? You know,
right, college, undergrad at Purdue. Lots of career fairs, and people constantly, I lived in a fraternity and I was also in a dorm before that, and you know, saw lots of people constantly shining up their resumes and like, I gotta take this thing in, and you know, I got the big interview with Procter & Gamble or whatever today for the summer internship, and hey Shobe, I hear you've been working on that desktop publishing stuff. Can you help me make this look better? My resume is in terrible shape. And so you know, hey, yeah, you can do this, and you need to maybe use like a sans serif font here and serif here, and you know, back off of the Zapf Chancery over here with your name. And
they're like, what?
Know, and they're like, Zapf what? You know, I'm like, no, just get away from making it look like a Gothic novel. And started to realize that I could see patterns in how people were composing. This is all pre-LinkedIn and all of that. So how you presented yourself was on this 8.5 by 11 sheet of very expensive paper. And I saw patterns and figured out I had it's just me. I couldn't scale it, but I could make some good money helping people improve this, this sales vehicle for themselves. And, you know, did a few dozen, maybe, 50 or 100 of those before I kind of ran out of steam on it and finally got a summer internship. But it was one of the first things that suggested to me I could just hang a shingle out. I put flyers around campus up on the bulletin boards and said, Ready Resume was I think the name of the company, and I charged some ridiculous thing like $15 for 45 minutes or an hour of work. And, at the time it seemed pretty good. It was like $15 an hour.
What's interesting is simple as you found a problem and you create a solution. Maybe you stumbled upon
product market fit was right there. Exactly. It's like people are like having trouble putting their best foot forward. Crappy looking resumes abound. Lots of low hanging fruit. Yeah. I know some good technology. I have some design skill thanks to academic background and my own interest. Yeah. Applied to the problem. Had a few customers that took a bet on me. They liked the results. They got jobs, and it led to referrals.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And so from there, you graduated, and what was the next step?
I managed to find my way into an internship at Microsoft. That was my first exposure to the Northwest.
Bring you here?
Yeah, that was the first time I'd made it out here on a summer trip right before my senior year in undergrad. But I managed to get an internship with the usability group, what was then called the usability group at Microsoft in 1993. And that was what really that at the time seemed like kind of the summit. That was right near the top of what would be the most potentially interesting places to be in technology anywhere, because I loved, and I still love, the whole personal computing experience, like how much power an individual has to create with the tools that are available to them. I mean, today it's ridiculous, but even back then it was formidable. Like, yes, desktop publishing was threatening to revolutionize who could become a zine producer. Anybody could, and you could make something absolutely first-rate, Sports Illustrated quality layout. Pick your favorite, top of the mountain magazine. Yeah. That was possible for you to produce. And I, saw what was going on at Microsoft across a whole spectrum of technology and thought, well, this is the place I would want to go. And managed to get in there and have a great summer working on prototypes of Windows 95.
No way.
And
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, well, I was doing usability tests of them. It was incredible. Somebody did a full prototype of Windows 95's desktop, call it for the Chicago version. I think it was the Chicago version of the prototype of Windows 95 in Visual Basic. And it was like this 700K executable. And you just launch it before you'd start this usability test. And it was like, boom, Windows 95, now serving on this Windows 3.1 box. And people would come in the lab and they're like, whoa, this is totally different. I was like, yes, it is. And you wouldn't believe how thin the veneer is on this now. But just seeing that kind of technology evolving and having that gig and being at that place at that time before that big wave hit was just really cool. I felt privileged to be there at that time.
And what was one thing that you maybe took away from that internship experience? You're obviously really young. You're working with one of the biggest technology companies in the world, the biggest at the time.
I think the answer is always yes to any reasonable request. Like, more often you say yes when people are like, hey, do you want to look at this thing that we're working on? Like, people would ask me questions about like, hey, I'm working on this study about something, and it would get me involved in another meeting. And then I, started talking to some other people and started working on, like, I just started working on the Windows thing, but then kind of found my way into working on this other publisher product via, a hallway conversation. And, the guy's like, you interested in, taking a look at this? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, sure I would. And it, led to a little bit of extra experience there. I think I ended up CCing on that one. On my final, batten down Microsoft Word usability report for that, I ended up CCing Melinda French Gates on that report. And I was like, that was my great claim to fame. I'm this close to the boardroom. One more, two more of these reports, and I'm sure I'm gonna go far, kid. Yeah. But no, just I think I sort of figured out at that point that opportunities come along. They aren't always making themselves super obvious, but the more often you leave yourself open to them, the more mixers you go to, the more times you say yes instead of I'll do it next time, just the more interesting things are going to be.
That's really interesting. And so let's jump into the first company that you started. Describe that experience. Like, what was
first non-resume real company. So I came back to Chicago for a year after the Microsoft internship, then went back to, the Northwest started to have its pull on me, and then I decided after a year at Anderson Consulting, the work that I was doing there wasn't that interesting. I mean, it was this cool new project within the firm, but it wasn't like, I was like, I don't see my life's work here. But I met some really interesting people while I was there who were looking out and seeing this, Gopher is kind of fun, but this web thing is coming next. And that, this NCSA Mosaic is, I think that's really going to go somewhere. And, I think there's going to be this whole browser thing that happens. And so I kept in touch with them when I went back to grad school at the University of Washington in the technical communication program, and decided, I still think somewhere in the West is the technology that I want to work on. It's either at Microsoft in Seattle or one of the companies in that constellation. Remember, this is 1994, 95. Nobody knew what was going to happen on the internet, except it was kind of bubbling over in a corner. And then I was like, there's a lot going on in the Bay Area too. I probably should be somewhere in Pacific time to see what happens next. Well, it turned out for a variety of reasons I didn't stay around here. I ended up going back to Chicago after grad school. Mostly I got married, my wife and I were both looking for jobs at the same time. We ended up with a better combination of gigs between both of us back in Chicago, where she's originally from, and I had spent more time in the Midwest, so we moved back. But that same crew of people looking out from the firm ended up being my co-founders in what became a series of 3 startups in Chicago. And the very first one wasn't actually our own thing. It was this other thing that these other 2 guys had decided to get built and had managed to get some venture funding behind it called, it was a company called DKA, Digital Knowledge Assets. It sings, it rolls off the tongue like an aria or something, right? Anyway, we knew, and we couldn't even, it's 1996, right? Or late 96? We couldn't even get DKA.com. That was like taken already by some law firm somewhere. I think, no, it was an offset press in like Laguna Beach or something. Had DKA.com, and like for whatever reason we didn't want to spring for like $5,000 or whatever it would have been to buy the domain. I don't remember. I'm totally making this up now. So we were DKAweb.com, and so we basically built a group blogging platform for the intranet. So it was essentially a way for people to find links and other interesting things and to share them with other people in the company.
Wow.
But it was installed as a service, like on a server in your intranet. Today you throw it out on Heroku or App Engine or something and just be like, okay, it's out there. Go plug it into your internet or plug it into your intranet, use it at your company, and it's a cloud service. But back then it was like, this should be an installable thing. And
interesting.
But that was the first time I had joined a startup. It was like not Microsoft, not Anderson Consulting, not Purdue University, not anything. I just was like, these guys are cool. We laugh at each other's jokes is what it came down to. We're these culturally compatible 20-somethings and a 30-ish guy, pretty much close enough together in space and time to say we should go try to do something out there independent together.
Let's say that right. Yeah. This is really interesting. You just described basically there is this glue between co-founders that is really important.
It started there.
And can you describe that a little more, because I think some people miss it or they don't.
It's something, it's hard to say exactly how to find it, but I think it starts with shared experience, either at another big company. You see this, I think Bob even talked about this a bit in your previous interview. You see these companies, super talented individuals that have worked together over a good period of time. A lot of them did so first at the big co. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, wherever. For us, it happened to be Anderson Consulting. In the early 90s, that was a pretty good choice. Lots of smart people went into consulting, worked on big systems, client server and middleware and all that fun, more like enterprise-facing stuff. Their personal computing was mostly happening in pockets in the West in Silicon Valley, but we did what we could, but we realized, like I said, there were some cultural touchstones we all had together. Like when I say we laugh at each other's jokes, that sounds kind of flip, but that's absolutely critical. There's something about like the dynamic of things you find in common, either in humor or in pop culture or sports or shared meaning, that just make it more fun to be around those people. And then what comes along with it, the only reason you're going to succeed, you're going to have any success at all, is if you have complementary skill sets. Like you don't overlap. Whoever your co-founders are, you have some degree of overlap. Like engineering cares about design cares about engineering and knows a thing or two technically. Product is kind of mixed up in all of that, but ultimately they want to focus on the area they do well and are not in each other's business or not like at cross purposes. That was definitely the case for the four of us. So there were four is kind of I'm led to believe now is a large number of co-founders. Like 2 and 3 is far more typical, but we fit well together.
That's awesome. That's everything. When I see great teams, I sense that, and then when I see, I've been a part of a team where co-founder it left after 6 months or whatever, and I think that's what we lacked was we came together to quickly start a company. What we didn't do was we grew together and knew each other over the course of 2, 3, 4 years or whatever that worked at the same experience. So that's really interesting. And so it sounds like you guys started a few companies together. Yeah.
That first one, the Scene Server was the name of the product. It was way ahead of its time. It was ridiculously difficult to build given the technology platforms of the age. But we put it together. We got close to one potentially interesting exit. That didn't happen. We got further away from other less interesting exits, and eventually it just kind of quasared. It imploded and became a flashing beacon of almost could have been. But the folks that worked on it together realized, in general, we had, there was the core 2 founders and then the 4 of us that joined and then a few other people. We had, 18 or 20 people all in total.
Was that a venture funded?
It was, I forget who, I think it was like Peter Kiewitt's sons or somebody was involved in it. But that group of people then wove in and out of each other's lives through 2 or 3 more startups over the next dozen years in Chicago. I know that same story has happened countless times in the Valley and countless times in the Northwest. And so there's nothing atypical about it, but I just happened to see that start to develop and realized, I like working with these folks. There's a way of working together that seems to make sense, and I'd happily go into battle again with this set of guys. And it turns out that those original 3 that I'd worked with, Dick, Eric, and Steve, they spun out of as the DKA thing went away. There was one part of it that Eric spotted. Eric is so again, you talk about complementary skills. Eric is clearly our CTO, a guy who could think at scale, like he thinks about pouring a bowl of cereal for breakfast. I mean, he has always been able to visualize how to build great systems and have them work at whatever, at whatever scale, whatever scope they're supposed to work. And also just a great business mind as well. Anyway, he saw this one component of this group blogging platform thing. He's like, well, we had these cool alerts and you could get notified when, Nick or Mark or Dick or somebody would post something cool in a topic area you cared about. You get notified within the system. He's like, let's point that whole thing at the internet and notify people when changes they care about on the web happen, on stocks, on eBay listings, on web, just plain old web page changes. Like when my competitor updates his sales or pricing sheet, I want to know about that. And this is 1998, late 98, so it's kind of a novel concept. There really wasn't an alerts deck, so we decided that's a cool idea. Sure, let's go try to build that together. And so we set out to build the next company, which was Spy On It. Was the name, spyonit.com was the name of that. And that pattern went one more time beyond that to be, you start with the ashes of what didn't quite work or might have worked from the previous startup, and kind of mix those around to figure out what the next thing is going to be, but with the same people.
I feel like you're describing what we call pivot now, but you didn't use that word.
No, it wasn't a pivot because it wasn't the same organization. Okay. I mean, I look at it this way, that the DKA thing came to its conclusion, both ran out of money and ran out of product runway, and that was that team disappeared. But a subset of that said from a component of this, I think there's this other thing we can build. Yeah, it's a pivot in that ideas from A become part of B, but no continuity in terms of, well, we're startup co, and now this thing didn't work. Okay, we're still startup co, we're going to do this now instead. So, I can see why you say that. I mean, it's fair to compare it to a pivot, but just because it was a completely different organization, I think the semantics are slightly different.
Right.
But the fundamental thing of we're this team and we know how to like get spun up and get to building it once we think we know what we're going to build really quickly, and then really quickly experiment with what's working, what's not with that early framework was kind of put in place by the experience at the DKA company. And then very, very nicely refined, I think, at Spy on it.
Yeah. Well, and then third one,
FeedBurner. So FeedBurner grew out of I wouldn't say Spy on it had ashes. I mean, we got acquired by a Canadian mobile banking company, who took what was essentially a consumer product. You would, as a consumer in 1999, go to spyonit.com, you'd create an account, and then you'd set up spies, and they would tell you about these things you cared about. Like I mentioned, stock prices. Our favorite spy, I think everybody's favorite spy, well, there are a variety of them. My personal favorite was, as I speak for everyone, was the PlayStation 2 spy. So when the PS2 was brand new, those things were freaking hard to come by. And we set up, we had a framework. It was called Alerts Builder. It was kind of like an SDK. You could write a little XML file and create your own alerts. And so we were able to create our own alerts fairly quickly. We kind of opened it up as a sort of an API for third-party developers at that point. But the PS2 alert would tell you whenever KB Toys or Amazon or any of the online toy retailers at that time had a limited shipment come in, because we'd pay attention to their, X in stock field on the page. Awesome. And all of a sudden it would come up to go from 0 to 152. Spy on it would go out, scrape that, find it. I mean, it was the scraping days. There was no APIs to connect to really. And we pulled it back and we're like, PS2 is for everyone, and send out the alerts, and we'd send them to ICQ. That's right, I said ICQ. ICQ alerts, pagers, AOL Instant Messenger, email. We had a bunch of endpoints. That was the coolest thing. A bunch of endpoints you could get these alerts on. And I don't know that you'd do it any differently today. I mean, you could notify to other social networks and such, I guess, but you'd still you want to have it like go off on your device right now. It's like push alert. Oh, there's a PS2 available. It's 2001. This is a time machine. That's crazy. But anyway, that was that particular alert kind of highlighted the raw value of the system. Yeah. And from that, we started to see with getting this back to FeedBurner, we started to see at the end of that run with the acquiring company, 9/11 happened, the dot-com bust happened. This is 2000, 2001 when the acquisition happened. The fortunes for that company and for this product narrowed to being an enterprise product for adding alerts to mobile applications, for mobile voice carriers at that point. So getting alerts via text and using this as a value-added tool for carriers was how they sold it. So it went from this big consumer story to this very narrow sell to enterprise and sell to the carriers and let the carriers figure out story. So way less interesting for us, but that was what it became. That's one of those things, right? You sell a business, you hope for the best, but oftentimes the outcome that you envisioned and the acquirer envisioned don't necessarily realize. Yeah. Sometimes it goes in a better, completely even more awesome direction, but a lot of the time it never fails to realize its potential.
And when someone is looking at an acquisition, given the fact that you've been through a few, how would you counsel someone when they're looking? Because what you just said is it typically doesn't work out like the ideal situation. But obviously, some investors or even founders want to have some liquidity. Is it?
Well, right.
So what would be your advice on if someone's like looking at this crossroads?
If they're actually looking at a possible sale, but it's not absolutely cut and dried. I mean, I don't know if it almost never is, I suppose, but excuse me. I guess I would look at. I'm not going to nuts and bolts this from a financial perspective, because there are a bunch of people that could do that, I'm sure, a lot more effectively than I could. But I think in your gut, the value of the business, and if you're close to a fair price. So I think a lot of that ends up being more gut feel than goal seek in Excel. Yeah. But within reason. But for me, in looking at so I know we've kind of skipped over the story of FeedBurner entirely, but when Google started looking at FeedBurner very seriously as an acquirer, and we actually went through these rounds of interviews as a company, as individuals in the company, to see how we all fit in there, and like who would make the leap and who wouldn't. I mean, the cold, harsh reality of it is that it happens in a lot of these acquisitions. you have a sense for how you think things are going to work out for you personally as well as for the product based on how culturally compatible you feel that post-merger company is going to be. Like, do the people that you're joining share your point of view in general on how to build product and how to work together?
And is it you as the founder of this startup interviewing them as well?
Yes, it is. But I mean, at that point, it's more about, it always goes both ways. Like if you're in a job interview or some kind of interview and you're doing well, but you just like get a terrible feeling about the way the business works, or you just don't have good chemistry, I mean, in general, that'll come out, but you'll also, as the interviewee, be making your own judgment going, I don't want to work here. This place is, I can make some money, but this place is terrible. It just goes against everything. I don't feel comfortable here. And I think you feel the same thing in an acquisition scenario where you're meeting the corp dev leads or the CEO, or it depends on the scale and scope of the company. You'll have that. You'll either get some quick words with them, and welcome to the team and all of that, or you'll maybe have a more honest and in-depth moment of insight in talking to senior people running the deal, or the people you're likely to be working with after the fact. And you got to go with your gut on those and feel like, this is somebody 6 months from now I could still see myself either reporting to or seeking advice from. Like if you would go to one of the people that you talk to during the corp dev process well after the fact and say, I'm having trouble navigating political or functional channel X, can you give me some advice on that? And you feel like that's somebody you would actually go back to after the fact, it's probably a decent leading indicator that they're closer to having your interests truly at heart than somebody that's just trying to run some number. So
a lot of acquisitions, once they get taken into the larger company and they try to integrate the technology, it doesn't necessarily work out. Or why is that? Is it just trying to smash two cultures together?
There are a good number of very savvy business professors and others trying to figure that out and come up with I'm sure common patterns, like when is the right time to sell, what are the right reasons. Plenty of case studies, even was the one on FeedBurner. But in the end, I mean, everything's a riverboat gamble to some extent. You don't know for sure, even if the best of intentions, like I say, the pre-acquisition interviews went swimmingly. You think they're great people. You love their products and their technology as an acquirer. It may still just not work out because the world changes. And even for FeedBurner, to some extent, you could say, RSS as a consumer technology, perception of which it's way less important now, if not unimportant at all, or completely unimportant, versus where it stood in 2005 and 2006 at the height of podcasting, at the height of, really, I guess you could say that the absolute height of the most explosive period for blogging, when it seemed like everybody was starting a new blog platform, and there were all sorts of new, I go back to desktop publishing, and all sorts of new venues for self-expression. More platforms came online for text, audio, and video in that middle period. It felt like RSS, FeedBurner, and syndication was going to be the way that those subscriptions found their way to wherever they needed to go forever and ever, amen. Well, I mean, that infrastructure's still there. Those things are still getting out there. iTunes still delivers podcasts that way, but it's just way more under the covers now. And the prominence that it seemed like RSS was going to have within Google's product mix just never came to pass. And it was not for lack of effort. It was not for malicious intent. It was not for any of that. It was just a combination of factors. As the world moved on, the Great Recession happened, a variety of priorities changed, and the product just never moved much beyond where it was from where it got acquired, and that was that. And it's just the nature of things. And like I said, my sort of gut feel around like when an acquisition feels like it's going to work well, it totally did pass that test, or would have passed that test with my feel for how things went at Google, and I had a great time there myself. I mean, it ended up being a very comfortable, challenging, excellent place for me to actually work, but the FeedBurner-ishness of it all didn't end up being part of that equation at all.
So when after the acquisition, I know the product continued, but did your team continue to work on the product, or did you guys work on other Google products as well?
Eventually, almost everyone ended up working on something else or leaving Google. There's still a few people there who are, nobody's really working on FeedBurner now. It's in maintenance mode, as they call it. It's essentially kept running. There's one guy in Chicago, I think, that kicks the tires and lights the fires from time to time, but No, there was a good year and a half of solid integration work done to make sure it ran at scale, and it was a remarkable amount of, a remarkable exercise in multiplying by one, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Because but way more capable once running on Google's infrastructure, like the amount of email we could send, the number of queries per second, what they call QPS, we could handle just went up by a factor of, oh my God. And that's exactly what Google Scale was supposed to bring to the party. But the challenge there was, and now we tie it into Google Analytics, and we tie it into the ads engines with AdSense and the new DoubleClick platform that Google just acquired. Speaking of which, they just acquired this platform. Suddenly display becomes like this big, huge, existential priority for Google to get right, and feeds suddenly seem less important, and just the world moves on. And so what you thought you were working on, less of a priority, now the company needs you to work on new designs for this thing. And these engineers who worked on this, they got to work on this other thing because that's a bigger priority now.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Yeah.
It just happens.
What's really interesting is you're definitely a part of a select few people that have been on a rocket ship, let's call it that. And in the process of startup to realizing okay, we have something and people are starting to take a hold of it, describe that experience, because for every one of you there's 100 if not 1,000 entrepreneurs that are trying to hack on something and they just never get there, right? So what is that like? And then secondly, is there any way to actually hack that so that you somehow get there quicker?
Yeah.
Or is it just luck? I mean, a lot of it.
In part, it's luck is, how many cliches are there for this, right? Timing and preparation or something like that, right? The preparation meets opportunity, et cetera. I'm sure there's some Pete Carrollism here I'm totally missing. But separation's in the preparation. No, that's Russell Wilson. Never mind. I think it's definitely a matter of chance getting you just the right way, but you're prepared for it because, kind of going back to what I said about my Microsoft experience of almost always saying yes to any reasonable request, constantly giving yourself more at-bats or whatever you want to use as your metaphor for opportunities to have an impact is going to give you a better chance of getting on one of those rocket rides. And really finding a group of people you trust, and going back to the laugh at each other's jokes and complementary skills and the things that make a good founding team, able to kind of yell at each other and then go, yeah, no, I know, that wasn't personal, and move on. That's an amplifier. I mean, finding great founding teams, that's become one of the things that has become, I guess, an area of advocacy for me, is to try to help people earlier in their careers find those teams or those groups of individuals that they know that they can go make something happen with over repeated cycles. It's one of the things I love about Techstars is even if the current business doesn't work, you get a really good sense of oh yeah, they're totally going to do something great together someday. And they were really kicking ass at Amazon. Now they're doing this great thing here, and could go either way, but I see how well they work together, and I love seeing that. And so back to us, the two startups prior to FeedBurner were rockets that got off the pad a little bit and then either fell over or got caught in midair, or the chute went out and it kind of crash landed, but with some stability. Metaphors. But in the process of launching those missions, I think we got a good sense of okay, we do this and that and that in this order. And then you send a viral email out that says, hey, we're testing this new thing to these 50 people who are pretty influential and hope something good happens. And with FeedBurner, it did, we did hit it at seemingly just the right time and had the first mover advantage. There's a lot of that stuff you can't control for. We had first mover advantage on creating this kind of a publisher platform. We had somebody that knew how to build it at scale. We knew how to stay ahead of our own demand, because we could have easily been suffocated by, when podcasting happened, if we had been caught flat-footed technically. We had to have a whole bunch of things just break right. The thing was, we thought we knew who to talk to at the right stages to get the right people on board, or reallocate the people we had to make sure we could cover for that. We have to build a sales team. All right, we're going to have these guys go build that. We're going to have Rick and Brent make that happen, and a publisher support team. And Matt, you run customer service. I was like, well, I haven't done that before, but I can go look at what we need to do there, and I can do everything in my power to make sure the voice of how we communicate to the outside world is as consistently applied as possible, and make it clear through my own, I think Bob Crimmins was talking a lot about what does execution mean, or how does that actually work? And where do talk is cheap around what does it mean to be able to execute? I think a big part of execution is setting good examples as a leader. So not just doing work and kind of doing it over the wayside and saying, oh, it's no big thing, but saying, here's how I did this. I did it this way for a reason, and I want you to follow me on this as much as you can, because this particular way of doing things is really important.
Yeah.
But be yourself, express your own creativity where is appropriate, but where there are certain ways of doing things, and I don't mean to get all processy as a startup guy, but certain cultural things like accepting blame, not blaming the customer, but going, yep, that was on us, we're going to figure this out unconditionally, even if it totally was the customer not looking at the system correctly. You can't take that stance. At least for FeedBurner, we never were going to do that. So we were always going to say, this is on us, we're going to get it right. And that's not easy to communicate. Like when it comes to, like, you hire a new engineer, you say, you're going to work support. Like, what do you mean I'm going to work support? We say, we all work support here, so you're going to do that. And why? Because look, Dick over there, the CEO, he's doing support emails to investors and others right now.
Yeah.
I take Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. We do it this way or you don't work here.
Yeah.
And we never had anybody get up and be like, I'm not going to do any more support email. I mean, it was frustrating for all of us to be 8 days a week on that. But we also knew that was critical to maintaining the brand, maintaining our point of view of like why we built it to work the way that it worked.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want it to communicate itself any other way.
No, I think that's really interesting that you're basically talking about leadership and it's just leadership by example, and actually being at least strong enough to say, this is how we do it. And just like, but also leading by that example, not just
telling somebody. Yeah, exactly. You can't just say, this is how we've always done this
and then
here.
walk away.
I mean, that's a recipe for disaster, absolutely. No, it's like, all right, here's how I wrote a bunch of these emails. If I'm talking about this customer support example, and they go, oh, okay, I see kind of how you wrote that. Here are these pre-canned messages we've got. Okay, I see how that works, got it. Meanwhile, Eric, our CTO, can say, here's how we manage the code base, and here's our general set of best practices for working with Java in this way, and here's this whole other framework for thinking about how to use the systems that we're building. That is the equivalent of what I was talking about from a customer service, or a design perspective. And when it came to design, that was a bit squishier, but in general, there were only 3 of us on the design team, so we kind of figured out our own rules, but I had some points of view around like how I wanted to see us use color and how I wanted to see us use type. Yeah. And I had, we had butted a little bit around that, but in general, I said, we've established this look and feel, and I managed to see, some parts of things that I had done in the past show up in the other designers' work in the future. Their take on it, but like this one we always like rounded the right corner of certain squares, and I did that way early just because I was like, hey, I can round a corner. My God, it's 2004. The internet finally allowed me to round a corner, And anyway, seeing that echoed without me saying round that right corner by one of the one of our designers is just like, good. I think I've done something right here. The one thing I did right this month, so I got a rounded right corner.
That's awesome. It's pretty cool, your history intertwined with Dick Costello, current CEO of Twitter now.
Yep. He's kind of busy this week, I'm told.
For sure. I think it's great. What did you take away from working with him? His background in stand-up comedy and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that's just it. I know a lot has been made of that since, especially since he became CEO. Yeah. But even his first tweet as a Twitter employee, it was like, first day as CEO at Twitter, step 1, undermine CEO, step 2, consolidate power. You immediately knew that his whole thing is to disarm by way of smart humor.
Right.
And that is, the essence of what makes you great at improv, I think ends up making you really, really good at entrepreneurship and being a leader.
And so what would those be? I think that's really interesting. What would those be in terms of essence of improv?
Well, here, watch me tie this all together. Remember how I said the answer is always yes to any reasonable request? Yeah. One of those basic tricks they teach you in Improv 101. I've only taken one improv course. I should take a lot more, so much for me practicing what I preach, but I've taken a little, is that one of the transitions for when you get into a bind with somebody else on stage is when you get to the end of a line, is you say yes, and, because that causes you to immediately think, how do I tie what he or she just said to the next thing that I'm going to say if our theme is, whatever it's going to be. I'm in a park reading a newspaper and she just drove up in a riding tractor, and I'm supposed to say yes, and I'd have those blades sharpened immediately, otherwise there's going to be trouble in this town. Not so great, but you get the idea that yes and is going to get you further with a skit than anything else. So I think that in general, the flexibility that you're supposed to have on your feet to be able to link thoughts together and get to a point and then move on from that, not just like dealing with hecklers and all of that kind of fun stuff, although that's certainly useful at certain tech conferences, just leads to you being a better communicator and a more interesting communicator. And I think, you know, in looking at the way that Dick has handled being CEO, it almost always comes back to, when people remark about it, he's like steady-handed, focused on results, but disarming and funny almost always seem to fall into that. So it's like he's got that level of technical execution that the street wants to see from the CEO of a company about to go IPO. And you know, they talk about really interesting things like leaving behind the "make better mistakes tomorrow" sign in the old Twitter HQ, saying, no, that's not our standard. We're not going to make better mistakes tomorrow. We're going to make better decisions tomorrow. You know, or whatever the case might be. And I think that, you know, that essentially shows how well he's doing in terms of being able to balance the professional expectations with the personality he's always brought to his leadership role.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I always sat to his immediate right, and he always used to, he used to joke occasionally that he and I had a lot of fun like writing blog posts. Like we would share voice on those a bit. And so he'd write one and I'd go in and tune up a couple of lines, or I'd write one, he'd come in and tune up a couple, because we had a really similar sort of point of view on like comedians we liked and sense of humor about like, in general, like the same sort of Simpsons bits or Monty Python or what have you. We found some commonality there. But at one point, I think Dick said something like, every now and then I just take what Shobe said and I say it louder. Because every now and then I'd be sitting to his right and say, you know, I'd be like Smithers to his Burns. I'd be like, well, I don't know, sir, that's not such a good idea. And you're like, you know what? I think that's a tremendous idea. You know, and so anyway, or whatever the line might have been. But we had a lot of fun working on those nuts and bolts together, and especially building the voice of that company via the blog at that point. And had there been a Twitter for us to tweet on, then I'm sure it would have showed up there too. But that was a little before all that happened.
Man, that's awesome. He to me, in my mind, he's a great leader, and I think he's the right person right now. Because it is like what you said, you know, people have unique skills and talents, but the ability to infuse, like, not to take yourself too seriously, infuse humor. We don't need to be buttoned up too much, right? There is personality that needs to come out in leaders, especially like, you know, a CEO of a large company. And I think he does a really good job of doing it.
I mean, I haven't seen, of course, I've spent almost no time at Twitter HQ actually watching how his day-to-day works there, but I can't imagine it's too different. There are more people, it's a much bigger space and such, but I can't imagine, and there's got to be way more demand for, like, his day has to be absolutely packed and regimented. Like at Feedburner, it was busy, but it was just kind of, we do stuff all day, and there are occasional stand-up meetings, and it is a completely different environment than what Twitter must be, right, for him. But I can't imagine his approach to things has really changed. Because I think the kind of leader and CEO he was then was the right experience and the right positioning for him to then essentially airdrop into Twitter as CEO in fall of 2009 or whenever that was. I think it was fall of 2009. And say, this is the opportunity. I know what to do. I can do what I do best, and bring revenue, bring a plan for monetization, not kill the soul of the brand, and understand, you know, what makes this great, and put out a plan for getting from this point to that point. And again, that leadership by example, he designed and then defined and taught an exec leadership course for Twitter executives based on his experience. And brought that structure to what had been pretty amorphous senior leadership structure before that.
Exactly.
And I'm not the least bit surprised that's what came out of it.
That's cool. And so we've talked a little bit about this, but what is interesting to you now? What's interesting to you now? Where are you looking in the entire tech landscape of things that interest you and that might have some possibility in the future?
I think the area that I find most interesting, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit before, I'm not sure I'm clear yet on what I want to pursue with it, because the possibilities are seemingly so broad, but the area of what you can do with UAVs and with so drones, as the popular term would have them, and that immediately makes you think of something that's either shooting missiles or peering in your bedroom window. No public perception problems around that word right now, none whatsoever. But it's fascinating when you look at what companies like 3D robotics and airware, and there's some, if you go on AngelList, on angel.co and look around for drone or UAV, you'll find some fascinating startups too. What's going to happen when hardware becomes, it's already happening, when hardware, 3D printing and other technologies people are starting to pay attention to, make it as easy to iterate on hardware-software combination ideas as software alone, that you'll be able to build a hardware-based business and experiment with it and fail at something and then try something else and get to success faster than ever before. And so where UAVs are used for things like agriculture, for like doing visualization and seeing where disease or hydration or fertilization problems are with crops, people are out there building that already. And so there are going to be, 4 and 6 rotor little copters flying over farmers' fields, figuring out like what's going on with the crop and helping them make much more precision targeted decisions about how to manage their land. Same will apply to viticulture for vineyards and to a host of other agricultural uses. And then there are fascinating things in that area that I've seen around what could potentially happen with action sports or other areas where first-person video perspective. Google Glasses give you the ultimate first-person perspective, but to have another third-person perspective or multiple omniscient views brought to you for a fraction of the cost of stringing up, like the old Skycam.
Yeah.
It's old. I mean, it's not old. I mean, the present-day Skycam system, you see it in the NFL or big college game. It'll be interesting to see that democratize its way down to maybe high school games or basketball or indoor sports for that matter. And I think it's going to be an area where you're going to see a lot of interesting innovation and areas that the examples I'm coming up with you can find on any of the UAV community sites that are out there. I mean, none of them are even close to original, but where it goes from here is the really interesting part. I mean, we're so early on, the FAA hasn't even declared how airspace is supposed to be used by commercial drones, so technically it's illegal to run a business that's nothing but drones. So like if you wanted to say, I'm going to shoot real estate, like a real simple example, I want to shoot really cool HD video of a high-end home for my real estate listing. You can do that as a value-add service as a realtor, like just as kind of a hobbyist, but you can't charge for it because then it's a business and that's technically illegal until the FAA makes it clear how a drone or a UAV can maybe be used in a commercial setting. So people have actually been shut down for doing stuff like that.
And when are they going to make that decision? Isn't it 2015?
Yes, that's the theory. Although with the amount of trouble we're seeing government continuing to keep the play button pressed down, I don't know if 2015 is realistic. So that's one of the challenges I also look at in this space is like, can I really build a business if I can't even count on a regulatory framework for it by 2015?
So, and one of my thoughts is, I am fascinated with this space and the ideas, but are we just going to have a world where there's just like things flying everywhere and like at what height, and they could be the size of an insect or the size of a bird or like bigger, like what?
You read your William Gibson, you realize that they could be subatomic particle size and all that fun stuff, right? So there's like a little cloud of drones between us right now, but nobody can see that.
You see that one?
And just go, get us another beer, and then it comes floating in. That would be something. I think, so I wrote a short piece on this a while ago. I think that one possible answer to that is I don't think it's going to be total dystopia, no matter what. I think society is going to see its way through to some norms for how, individuals can use personal UAVs. But if they're run for a business, how have we dealt with that on the web? Brand new platform. eBay, Amazon, and a host of others pioneered the idea of reputation systems so that if you knew there were bad actors, they were pretty clearly labeled as such. It's like, quit dealing with that jerk. So if there's some jerk running UAV construction company that's like, oh yeah, we use these for site security, and in fact they're flying around and peeping in neighborhood bedroom windows or doing something, that's going to get outed. I mean, yes, there's a law enforcement boundary that's easy enough to figure out and cross, I suppose, but I think just eventually, if UAVs are that prevalent, that the same kind of rep systems that can tell you when there's certain kind of activity going on around a book or around a DVD or around a hotel room will be there around companies providing UAV services. And so that'll be, the same rep systems that judge companies today might just be morphed slightly to deal with that. But I think there could be something, you could have a smartphone app someday where it's like, just tell me what's going on UAV-wise around me, and companies that are on that system will be registered actors, and you'll see there's a whole cluster of them over this UW construction site.
It's like Uber, right? Like you can just tap in and see, oh, there they are.
Yep, that's right. And so you turn that on. So then if you see, let's say we're in this world full of drones, right? And there's a whole bunch of drones doing stuff over here by City Hall or something. They're run by somebody who's just doing like a video blog or something. They're not on the system. You're like, okay, well that's just some guy who's not a system actor. He's got to be around here with his with his controller somewhere. I don't know. It's too early to say, but I have a feeling a lot of the same controls that we've seen kind of rein in bad behavior or moderate bad behavior, make it more transparent on the internet, will make it more transparent in the real world too.
So given that it's a very early it's early times in this market, how do you go about finding problems and then developing a solution in such an early market?
Well, that's a challenge I'm still trying to figure out how to master. I mean, the first thing I've been doing is trying to do my best Techstars early founder impersonation and go try to find product market fit and talk to, like in the ag space, I had a bunch of conversations with corn and soybean growers in Nebraska and with tulip bulb growers in Mount Vernon, north of Seattle, as well as a big orchard east of here in Yakima, and got a sense of, well, I've heard some stuff about this, but I don't really have. I mean, my problems are dealing with my land and my lease and my labor cost hassle that I have. I never heard a lot from this initial set of people I talked to that I thought was going to be this golden bounty of, oh, if only I could see like the far side of my land at any given point of the day, and know that the hydration is right over there. I think I wasn't asking the right set of questions, but I started to figure out like there are going to be better questions for me to figure out how to ask going forward, and eventually I started to run into people that had already started to develop ideas around this space that gave me ideas for how to go back to and talk to some of the folks that I originally talked to, and have gotten some more development since then. But I think the only way, regardless of my personal struggles with trying to find like, okay, there's this product market fit, I see all these people creating, the other validation